Hello. Before we get into this week's episode with David Callaghan, I just wanted to make a slight apology, no, a serious apology about a slight video issue where my camera ran out of battery towards the end of the episode. There is video, but it is not footage of my interview with David. It is the animated trailer that David made for his show, Everything That's Me Is Falling Apart, and it is intercut with the poster with details of his upcoming tour. So David's going on tour in February, which we discuss. So all the details for that are on the poster, which you will see towards the end of the episode. And I will include a link in the description to this video. I don't know about the light in here. I think it's quite warm, but I couldn't be bothered getting the big light out. So yeah, I think it's all right though. My conversation with David is very different to my chat with Chris. We talk a lot more about like politics and sort of class and things like that. But I really liked it. I thought that he would bring a different sort of approach to our conversation, and that's really what I want these conversations to be like, and them to be different in tone depending on the guest and depending on their relationship with the places that we are talking about. Speaking of, I hope you watched and enjoyed my episode with Chris Thorburn, episode 1. I didn't mention in the episode that Chris directed my special, Welcome Back, which you can watch on this channel. I also want to give a shout out to Chris because Chris is doing his solo show, Cineman, as part of the Glasgow International Comedy Festival, and he is performing it at the Glasgow Film Theatre on the 28th of March, and I am going to be opening for him. Cineman at the cinema of all cinemas, the Glasgow Film Theatre. For those of you that have never been, you should definitely come. And you should go to the GFT. It's a beautiful cinema. It is in Screen 2, which is going to be so good. It's just going to be absolutely beautiful, and I am going to try and do some more film type material. And I'm not doing a show at the Glasgow Comedy Festival this year, so it's the only chance to see me do stand-up at the Glasgow Comedy Festival. I feel ridiculous saying that, but yeah, so tickets are on sale now for that. You can just go to glasgowfilmtheatre.org. Just Google Glasgow Film Theatre. I don't know how regularly I will do these intros to the podcast. I do quite like doing this one, but I think I may use it to provide an update on the show itself. My next solo show, Welcome Home, which is also the name of this podcast. I've explained that already, and you'll hear more about that in the intro. I think at the moment, if I had to say how much of the show I had written for what is in the show just now, I think I have 20 minutes. Yeah, I would confidently say that I had 20 minutes of a show. So that's the update for just now. I have also written what I think is the ending. The very end, which is maybe foolish, but that's how... I'm just trying to get there, and who knows, maybe over the course of the next year and a half, year and 3/4, I will, the ending will change. So yeah, so that's where I'm at with the show. Thank you very much for deciding to watch, and please subscribe to the channel so you get notifications for when I put out a new episode, and please enjoy my conversation with the wonderful David Callaghan. My name is John Agasild. I'm a stand-up comedian living in Glasgow in Scotland. But I haven't always lived here. I was born and raised in Aberdeen in the northeast. I'm working on my next solo stand-up show, and I found myself writing and talking a lot about both of these cities. So I wanted to interview some other comedians about their hometowns, find out what they're like, why they left, why they stayed, and what home means to them. This is the Welcome Home podcast. That's that. So, thank you very much for joining me today. I appreciate it. You taking the time. But as we were kind of talking about this before we started recording, but because I'm trying to use the podcast to be a writing exercise, I do want to ask. How, you were saying it's a ridiculous question, but how do you write? And there's different parts to that question to help you answer it. Would being like literally, how do you write? Like where do you typically write, and what do you use? And how has writing your theatre work been different in writing stand up and the comedy that you did before that? And how has that been? How have you felt the practice of writing has been different?
Yeah, so good question. I think, and I didn't realise that I was different in this regard for a really long time. It was only until the most recent show that I realised I start at the macro and then fill in the micro. Whereas I remember talking to like Ian Smith, for example, or Amy, and they were working through their shows by constructing all of the bits together and then working out a theme. Mm-hmm. And I think that's how most stand-ups do it. Yeah. And that's probably why I've never really felt at home in that guise. Mm-hmm. Whereas what I tend to do is think about the big thing, and then I go, and then at this point there needs to be something about this, and at this point there needs to be something about that. Mm-hmm. And that's probably why it takes, like, the previous shows, I've never been really proud of them. 2019 was quite good, but 2022, 23, like this most recent one, because it had the pandemic and I had all of that time for it to gestate and me to be able to pick it apart and put it back together again, like it works loads better. And I think that's because it it fulfills the ambition that it had at the start. Whereas if you're putting together just a load of bits and then working out the arc, you already know how good the bits are.
Yeah.
And so you know going into a show how good it is, and you know whether it fulfills the ambition. Whereas I think I just never really knew that, and I didn't take long enough to work out whether it did or not, because I was coming from the opposite end of the spectrum.
Right, okay.
In terms of process, I find it really difficult to sit down and write at a desk. A lot of the time I do like voice notes while walking and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But also because everything's sort of experiential. Like a lot of the time things are just coming in the background. So I know each beat and point in a show how I want an audience to feel, because it just feels right. You know, it feels appropriate for that to happen. So, if that's on the back burner the whole time.
Yeah.
So that's coming through just when it's ready.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the project, once I've got all of those beats in, I'll go through and line by line it, and it'll be like, the nice thing about having done stand-up for about 8 years, is that I kind of know how the rhythm of jokes should work, and I know how the rhythm of stories should work, and I get bored really easily, so I know when audiences are starting to feel bored. So it's all about just like dropping in a joke here that is related to where that subject matter is, and dropping in a joke there that is related to that subject matter, and that's like a process of weeks and weeks and weeks of sitting in cafes and working it all out.
Right.
But yeah, I think I build things the opposite way around. I think I know how I want an audience to feel, and and it comes experientially at any point, and then I work out what inspired me to believe that. Whereas pretty much everyone else I know does it the other way round.
Yeah. That's interesting, like the voice notes thing, as opposed to sitting down at a desk and trying to write it. I think just because you think sitting down at a desk is comfortable, but then it's quite daunting, and writing stuff on a page or on a screen it feels like it's more like you're committing to something. Whereas if you're just more of a stream of consciousness thing, like you would do maybe on a stage, then that seems less like this is committed to the record of things. So then what do you go back and listen to voice notes, and you're like, oh, that's something, that's a kernel of of an idea.
Yeah, I'll re-listen to them and then I'll elaborate on them in the next voice note. So often I'll have recordings that go on that are like replicated again and again and again, and I don't really have to listen to the first one of them because that seed is there all the way through, but it's just gestated more. I don't know. I think, really, if you're not really excited about performing the thing that you are performing, I always feel like I shouldn't be doing it. I don't think I should be thinking about it all the time, because I'm the one who's going to be performing this on stage, and it does really matter to me.
Yeah.
So all of these ideas should be in the forefront of my brain the whole time. They should be little puzzles that I'm trying to work out. Because if I could forget them, then I'm probably not that interested, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So recording them is really important, because obviously you think of loads of different ideas, but really all of that still, it should be present in your brain, because if it isn't present in your brain, it's probably not that important.
Yeah, just like what the sort of brain soup of ideas. Yeah. I think I totally agree with the sort of gestation period of something, because there is the thing of like, oh well, I've had an idea. Having an idea is such a precious moment of divine inspiration that you feel that you feel excited about, and then sometimes writing it down, and then writing 2 pages, and then you're like, oh, this was not good. I don't like this, and then being like, well, I'm keeping coming back to this idea or this story, and because in Everything That's Me Is Falling Apart, which is your show that you're about to tour. Yep. Which is very exciting. That's awesome.
If anyone comes,
yeah, because that's short stories.
Yeah,
that's four short stories.
Yeah,
4 short stories.
Yeah, and then one story that goes across the whole thing that is told interstitially in between the 4 stories. So 5,
that's in the museum.
5 really? No. So there is the story of the museum isn't there, but the museum is the second story of the 4 that are self-contained, and then there is one story which is the arc of the narrator that goes over the whole thing. And whilst I'm changing boxes in and out, that is the story that's being told.
Yeah,
and that's the one that seemingly wraps it all up at the end.
Yeah,
and gives the kind of personalised version of this, because the whole thing is about mischances and lost love. So if I'm telling loads of other stories about mischances and lost love, there has to be some kind of relationship that I have towards it. Yeah.
So what we're talking about is, I'm sure you've got this down to a fine art, for want of a better term, of an elevator pitch, but what is Everything That's Me Is Falling Apart?
So it's an augmented reality comedy theatre show, told by a live camera on a toy train that goes around in a circle. The camera is pointed towards the middle of the circle, which is a wooden base. Within that wooden base, there are 8 boxes, All of those boxes contain miniature dioramas of what was described in the British Comedy Guide as liminal Britain. And then I did a...
I love that show.
Yeah. Yeah, I love liminal Britain. I'm the only gay in this corridor.
To which point, a lot of times in the work in progress that I saw of that, there was a lot of computer says no.
Yes.
Or train says no moments, but that's part of the delight of it. And then you have, for want of a more accurate term, like rendered graphics that are projected or into these physical, like it's like a bunch of little doll's house rooms, and it's unlike anything I've ever seen, and I think it's unlike anything anybody else has ever seen, and it's to be seen to be believed, I think, and I highly recommend anybody to go and see it. But it's fantastic. But thanks, I really appreciate you indulging me in that conversation. After we were just like, oh, it's such a difficult thing to define. But yeah, as I was, so I'm trying to write a show about my hometown, and then now this Glasgow where I live just now, and places. So my first question to you is, where were you born?
I was born in Dryburn Hospital in Durham City.
I've only had two guests so far, and both people have known the hospitals.
Yeah. We lived just down the road from Dryburn. It was. It's now Durham University Hospital. Yeah, it's changed into a uni training hospital now. But yeah, so I was born in Durham, and I lived in Durham until I was 11. And then we moved to Brussels for 2 years. Am I anticipating your further questions?
No. That's. But what is? Where is Durham?
Durham City is just inland from Sunderland and Newcastle. It's about 20 miles south of Newcastle. It's the cathedral is a World UNESCO Heritage Site.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. I think there's only one in the UK, or maybe St Paul's is as well. But yes, Durham Cathedral, and it is a city that is a very nice place to go and retire, but as a teenager, not tremendously exciting.
Right.
So, I think I always have to be really defensive of the northeast of England, because it takes a battering from. I mean,
I have the north written on my
the
north, what is
the north?
Yeah. So you have to be defensive of the northeast.
Yeah. So people say that it's horrible. There's a general discourse that the northeast of England is a horrible place, and I don't believe that that's true. And actually, what's happened over in the post-war era is a funding disparity that's been allowed to grow and grow. So, for example, the amount that is spent on roads in the southeast of England per head is just over £2,200, and in the northeast of England it's about £6.10. So the economic disparity in terms of infrastructure is like mad. And when they're cancelling HS2, which wasn't even going to come to the northeast, right? They're cancelling HS2. It's the reason that caused such an uproar, and the Tories couldn't understand why, is because our infrastructure is basically Victorian, and no one has invested in it since the Beeching cuts, I guess. So what, 66, 67? So
when you said £2,200 per head, I was like, right, I don't know how to quantify that. But then when you say £6, I'm like, right, okay, now the balance sheet is starting to.
And then you just extrapolate that over everything. Newcastle gets.
Roads are up there.
Yes.
When I used to work for a local authority, somebody was like, people just basically want potholes filled in and their bins collected on time.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a cynical view. I think that's also fair.
Yeah. It's interesting in local authorities, isn't it? Because
roads are my point being that roads are up there.
Yeah.
So when you're saying that's extrapolated across everything,
Yeah, well, yeah. There's lots of things that simply don't get any funding whatsoever. Yeah, the comparative. Newcastle gets to £11 million, 12 million pounds per year in Arts Council funding, and Sunderland, which is a larger population actually in the wider area, gets something like 300 grand. So you can see how a lot of money is spent on Newcastle. Well, not a lot of money, but for the region, a lot of money is spent on Newcastle and almost nowhere else. So I always have to be very defensive of the Northeast, because basically everything is set against us in every funding formula. Everything's set against us. So to literally not be in feudalism, it's really quite remarkable for my place and people. And I've seen so many comics who are from the northeast of England who go down south and say, I'm from here and it's shit. And it just feels so reductive, Because when you talk about like home and where you're from, really what you want it to be is like a love letter to that place.
Yeah.
And it be warts and all, whereas I think you've got to be really careful about it, because you need to demonstrate that there's a level of pride that you have.
Yeah, it is very reductive to just be like, this place is shit. And then I guess if you move to London, you're like, as opposed to this metropolis where I house share with 6 other people and I'm trying to pursue my dreams and I have to get just whatever job I can to pay this extortionate rent. Is like, that sounds like another definition of shit to me. But yeah, that's what I think maybe in the show that I'm trying to write, I kind of do want to have my cake and eat it as well a little bit. We're talking about stereotypes, but what is beneath that? But it is kind of difficult to, talk in a comedy show about saying, oh, this place is, an area of deprivation because of X, Y, and Z, and there's,
is it difficult, or has just no one ever done it?
I think...
Is that because it's difficult, or is it because they view the world in a much more black and white way than you do?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that you can't do that just because no one else has done it before.
Yeah, because I'm trying to... I've got some material about stereotypes about places, but then talking about different senses of community, or that I know my neighbours here, as opposed to where I've lived in more affluent areas where I haven't known my neighbours or haven't spoken to them. So trying to cushion it a little bit and bring that in after it. But so, is there anyone famous from Durham?
From Durham, Matt Baker, who did the One Show and Blue Peter. He's from Durham.
Oh, really? I always thought he was Welsh for some reason.
Yeah, I guess. Do you know what it is?
Now I hear it. Now I can hear it.
Yeah.
Matt Baker from I think it's one of me and Stuart McPherson's favourite things, which is when he's interviewing Mel Brooks.
Yeah.
When Mel Brooks is on the One Show.
It's so great. It's a real nutty show.
Yeah. Mel Brooks, Russell Crowe, and I think somebody from Birds of a Feather is on. Yeah. So Matt Baker from he's from Durham. Brilliant.
Yes. Is there anyone else? We had the biggest women's prison in the UK, so we had Rose West for a long time in Durham.
Signed to Durham?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, deadline day. She came on, she's on loan.
And just the prison, the boss of the prison, just her with a contract, the photo opportunity. Holding a grey sweatshirt behind her. Okay, so she was there. Wow.
Yeah, we also had Myra Hindley for a long time.
Where was the...
Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah.
Huge.
Big celebs, big female murderers.
Yeah. My goodness. Where was the prison?
Not too far from the town centre. Yeah, I mean, no one ever broke out. It's high security. No one ever broke out of it. And I think I don't know.
Good. I think I'll go on record to
But
say
it's strange,
good.
It's strange how close the proximity to like multiple murderers were to this place that is essentially like vying against York for its kind of quirky, sentimental teapot image. Do you know what I mean? It's all cobbled streets and like nice tea shops and stuff. And the idea that maybe 15 minutes walk away are some of the most despicable human beings in the history of Britain is such a strange thing. I've never really thought about that before.
Yeah. Well, so Durham was trying to brand itself as a sort of as a like York as this sort of quaint place. Yeah.
But I mean, when I was growing up,
just don't put when you've got the heritage trail. Just leave the prison off of the heritage trail, I guess.
The interesting about Durham is, it's a fact of deindustrialisation in the Durham coalfields that meant that there was like a whole generation of disenfranchised ex-miners who never really worked again and ended up becoming alcoholics and having various different problems. And then that is split down the middle in Durham. But at the same time that was happening, the university was expanding. And generally the people who go to Durham University are the people who are just too thick to get into Oxbridge. So really? Incredibly posh and privileged, but not very bright.
Right, okay.
And those two factions are just kind of diametrically opposed. So they would often be in the same pubs together.
Oh.
It's an interesting... Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds not unpleasant, but just a bit more tense than you'd like.
I guess it was a place where I could really viscerally understand wealth disparity.
Yeah.
UK wealth disparity was like happening live because these kind of tourist rich people had been parachuted into this place. Not that I wasn't, I was middle class, growing up, but to see it all happening all around me was interesting.
It's still your home. Regardless of class, it's still your home, and you still want to see want it to be nice and a nice place for people to live. And so you lived there for how long?
So I lived there till I was 11. When did we go? 2000.
2000.
So I was 11.
Right. Okay. So you moved to Brussels. You moved to Brussels, and for how long were you there? 2 years.
So my dad got a job in Brussels. So
cool! Wow! And then did you move back to Durham?
Yeah, came back to Durham.
Did you go to Durham University?
No, I went to Glasgow.
Oh right, okay. Yeah. Like, no, I got into Oxford.
So I went to Glasgow in 2009.
Oh right, okay.
I was 20 when I went to university.
Right. Why did you pick Glasgow?
Because I'd done my A levels, had very difficult teenage years in academia. I did my A levels in English media and theatre, but then
your A levels in English media and theatre. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then
that was offered at your school.
Yeah, you do media studies and
right. Okay. Yeah. Cool.
And then I think when I went into
we didn't have anything like that at my school.
Did you not?
No, we had English, but not media or theatre. You could do drama up to. I think you could do drama you did drama the first and second year, and I think you could do a sort of an intermediate 2, which was like below which was like between like an O level and an A level, and that was it. You couldn't do it in like 5th and 6th year.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
So why is that?
Don't know.
They just decided that it's an old Sunak thing, which is like no expressing yourself, maths.
Yeah. I think so. I think so. But that's really cool. So because I thought you were saying I did English media and theatre like it's one amorphous thing, and I'm like, subject. Wow, Durham sounds amazing.
Three. I mean, yeah. So by the end of that, wanted to do history. And Scottish universities allow you much more freedom because it's 4 years and you can change after the first year and that kind of thing. So applying for history, despite the fact that I got 3 A's, applying for history after those 3 A's at English universities just became incredibly difficult. Like I got into York and Leeds, but I got rejected from Manchester and Bristol, I think. I can't remember the other place on me. UCAS. but yeah, they didn't. Because I rang them to ask, would it be worth applying, and they were like, like, I've got 3 years. Is that not worth anything?
Right.
You could apply, but we'll have we'll have people who have 3 A's and A's in history.
Right. Okay.
And I think even if they'd got B's in history, they would be thought of better than a B in media, which is fair enough. An A in media, sorry. Which is
classics are
yeah.
classics for a reason.
Probably is worthless, but although the amount of people that you see on Facebook who can't understand what disinformation is and they can't understand how sources work and that kind of thing, you go, I think everyone needs to do an A-level in media.
Yeah.
Like, this is incredibly important in the current age.
Did you do theatre at school?
Yeah.
But, I mean, I know you said that you just did that, but it was did you do that like throughout, or were you like exposed to local theatre in Durham?
No, there wasn't really. I mean, there is a big theatre in Durham, but at that point, actually, the booking policy was like Eagles tribute bands, and it was very parochial for a place that is on the East Coast Main Line, and has like a Britain's Light Festival is there and that kind of thing. They've really changed how they view Durham as a kind of cultural output. How the locals would receive culture, but at the time, I remember it was like there was a lot of kind of quite, what would you say, commercial focus.
Yeah,
towards it.
yeah.
Because probably Eagles tribute bands sell loads better than like an Alan Ayckbourn or something.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe not Alan Ayckbourn, but the audiences going out to be challenged, maybe they didn't expect that to actually yield any money. And I guess when you're a theatre, especially in the northeast of England, like your arts council subsidies,
you're up against it.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's probably how you work things out. It's just the economics of the thing. So no, didn't do that.
Did you go and you don't remember seeing anything at that theatre?
No, not really. I think see Kitson there a couple of times.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
That kind of thing. No, it's like my parents used to take me to the Fringe from when I was a baby. So,
I was like, I wasn't
really
expecting the age to be a baby.
A baby, yeah.
Wow,
so
really?
I did all the kids shows, year after year after year, doing all the kids shows, and then
brilliant!
eventually graduated up watching. So I always loved like stand up, and then that really all changed. I think I loved stand up until I was 16, and then I saw Kitson do Stories to Wobbly Hearted. I saw him do Made Up Story. So what was that? 2003 at B14, and that was like the inciting moment in my development.
Okay.
It's like, oh, suddenly I want to do this. And actually, having started doing stand-up in 2012, was it? I think I spent a good 6 years or 7 years doing things that I really never should have been doing in the first place, things that I didn't really enjoy. But it felt like a career path. It felt like, oh, well, you've got to be good at this. You've got to be good at being the guy because that's who makes the money. And like, if you want to turn this into a job and whatever. It's only really in the last 3 years that I've actually started enjoying it. Right.
And really?
Yeah.
It's funny to have known you for longer than that. Yeah. But that's great.
Yeah.
That's great to hear that you're enjoying it and you've hit your creative stride.
Yeah. So an interesting period, but I think you become quite starved of like cultural output as a teenager living in quite a boring city. So finding something like that was really transformative. And then I was in a band when I was a teenager as well, and that was like being able to go on stage and do things.
Yeah,
felt like really viscerally enjoyable.
Yeah,
and sort of wanting to refine that and become bigger and better. Yeah. And I think I saw Stop Making Sense when I was about 12.
Right,
and
okay.
that was like, oh my God. Look at this thing.
Yeah. Is there, and this is quite I think my conversations will develop across the interviews that I have, but is there a sort of, it seems like it's like, I'm hesitant to ask the question, but I'm interested to find what you think about it. But do you think that your you're talking about being culturally starved of stuff. Then you try and find other stuff that's not local, that's not coming to you, to you take in that art and things like that. So what do you think, Durham or the Northeast, how that has informed your sense of humour?
Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? Do you like?
I don't know if it has. I don't know
Yeah.
if it has a quintessential Northeast.
There was, I mean,
North.
certainly Vic and Bob and that kind of thing is like, there is a sense in the northeast of England that surrealism and being wacky are like vital parts of the cultural ecosystem, and that kind of humour is really in our bones. And I think it becomes, there's loads and loads of really good alternative stand-ups and comedians and really creative people who are from the region, and I think that gets overlooked everywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there was, I'm not going to name him because I think he's had a tremendous amount of backlash for this, but a few years ago in Chortle, there was a comedian who wrote this article that was like, does anyone like alternative comedy outside of London? I don't think so. And he'd like done gigs around the rest of the UK, and it's like, no one even likes it. They just want someone talking about pies and their kids. And that felt totally alien to the experience that I'd had on the circuit. And at the same time, like, the pervading idea that everyone had of the Northeast.
Right.
Like, my experience was so different, and yet I understood exactly where he was coming from. I knew exactly what he was saying, because that is how we were painted to everybody else.
Yeah. Do you think that comes from it just being a sort of, there's less stuff going on, so it's a bit quieter, so creative people's brains have more time and quiet to wander, to
do you know,
have more surreal thoughts? Whereas if you're in a place that's overstimulating, you would be like, Jesus Christ, I don't have much brain space to...
I think there's a real thing about laboratory environments in which there's no outside commercial forces. Like, I think there was a really good rise in musical culture after the Labour Party got in, right? So, like, in 2000, between 2000 and 2005, 2006, you have like indie landfill, but you have like money going into culture in a way that hadn't for a long time. People were better off. The average man was better off, and so people went out and experienced culture in a much more well, not carefree, but certainly expenditure was, people expended more on culture. And that drove a lot of people in London and Manchester to all do the same thing. So, like, for every, I don't know, Fratellis or whatever, there was like 30 other bands like the Fratellis, right? Mm-hmm. And the Fratellis are just like Oasis or whatever, because they're all chasing that. They're all chasing
like a model,
the money, right?
Right, all right.
And it's the same in London. There is one Libertines, and then there's like 50 other Libertines, who are slightly worse, in one way or another. In the northeast of England, because there was no money, everyone just did what they wanted. Mm-hmm. So actually, when you look at the music industry at that period, I grew up going to Sunderland a lot, and Sunderland just suddenly had like 10, 15 new bands. Yeah. And they were all really different. They were all really creative and interesting and different. And I think if you don't have the possibility of becoming megastars or being spotted, or being able to fit yourself within a trend, you just do what you like. Yeah. And so there was all these really, really good artists who made loads of really good, interesting stuff, because there was not even a subliminal motivation. There was no economic motivation to be part of the trend, because it just didn't happen. Like, in clubs in Sunderland, you're not going to get spotted by your A&R man. Right. Of course you're not. Yeah. So just go out and play the music that you want to go out and play. Uh-huh. It made it much more culturally rich. Yeah. I think, if if we had something like UBI or something, there'd be so much more good creative art
Right.
because people would basically have jobs by being a citizen of society, and therefore they would just make exactly what they wanted to make, and it'd be weird and brilliant.
Yeah.
It's a good thing. You know, I've really struggled in the last few years with the notion of like coming to terms with all that stuff that I think I wanted when I was a teenager, which was like, oh, I love, you know, the day-to-day. I would love to be on telly doing something like the day-to-day, or like I love black books, or I love all of those things. And eventually you kind of boil it down to either you love making really creative and interesting art and funny things, or you love being on telly. Now, they're not mutually exclusive, but you need to pursue the right one of those because there's loads of people that are on telly and there's loads of really rubbish telly as well.
Yeah.
So if your only aim is I need to get on telly, you will likely be on shit telly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing. Yeah. I don't know. I think that's one of the real hallmarks of the Northeast is like, and I've never, you know, Durham, we don't really have very strong accents. So I was never viewed as a Northeast comedian.
Well, now I can. If you listen to this and then listen to the one show, you'll hear it.
Yeah, we're much more kind of Middle England, nothing voice,
right?
You know, so we don't get tarred with the same brush. I never felt like I was fitted in with the Northeast comedy scene. All these really strong, broad Geordies. It's just never really. I wasn't one of them.
And the personality that comes, that's rolled into that's rolled into that,
So,
but you're like, I know Newcastle. I've been there.
Yeah.
I've been there. I know it not just as well as you, but I have a working knowledge of it. That's tough because I feel similarly that I'm from place that is, you know, there's in the region of Scotland that there is a more dominant personality and literal voice and like voice that's been, you know, permeated throughout culture, being like Glasgow, and I like that, but I think there's also a thing of like I stand out because I'm not from there, but it also means that if I'm writing or if I'm trying to think of something, then it's harder for me to enter that, to either parody it or make a joke out of it if I wanted to, or that I have assimilated into that, because I have assimilated a little bit into Glasgow, but it's not the base of my personality. So what made you want to move to Glasgow? Had you gone and visited all the places that you wanted to go to
so
university
my brother lived
for?
in Glasgow before.
Oh, right, okay.
So I knew it as a city, and like it just felt really exciting. It felt like an exciting place to be. I think I'd just been to the pubs really, and there was like maybe 3 nice pubs that I'd been to.
Yeah.
I was like, I think this is my city probably.
That's enough.
I've been to 2 places that'll sell me lager. Awesome. I'll make that the next decade and a half of my life.
Yeah. And also, if you've been to Scotland, before you know that it's not a crazy journey to take. You know, if you're similarly to, you know, being introduced to art by your parents. Yeah. Then it's not a big leap for you to then try and pursue art and try and take it in. Yeah. And then if you know you've been to Edinburgh with your folks, you're like, well, they're not going to freak out if I move to Scotland. Not that you'd be thinking about that, but if you are making a big move, you're not typically going to move to the other side of the world. Not in our day and age.
Do you ever think about the representation of Glasgow, like outside of Scotland? Have you ever come across it?
No, because I don't know.
It is pretty much the exact opposite of my experience of Glasgow.
Right. Okay.
Even in the northeast of England, right, people think who've never been here have this conception that it's like an urban wasteland where stabbing is rife.
Right.
Sectarianism is the only topic of conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and no one can read. Right.
Right. Okay.
And that's the opposite of how I view
Yeah.
Glasgow. Maybe not the sectarianism bit, but the rest of it.
Yeah.
You know, and it's really interesting to say to them, like, why do you think this? And there's no one source. It's 100 years of different, that being drip fed in by people who've learnt it from somewhere else. So
Yeah.
a kernel of truth has been put out there sometime in the 1970s.
Uh-huh.
Right? And that has been banded together with all this other stuff about Red Clydeside and,
Yeah.
Victorian and like old Ivor Cutler stories or whatever.
Right.
And that has just become this huge tidal wave that is the pervading idea of what Scotland is like.
I mean, that doesn't really make much. I'm not saying what you are saying. It doesn't make much sense, but it is about representation in the media because I don't know. It would have been interesting to see if there were jokes about heroin in Scotland before Trainspotting came out, because that's still the strongest like cultural thing. Like, I mean, I'm sure
people think that's Glasgow.
Yeah.
Everyone in England, they've got no conception of the difference between Edinburgh and Glasgow for starters, but they see Edinburgh as like the castle.
Uh-huh.
Why would there be poverty in Edinburgh? That doesn't make any sense. Poverty, poor people, that's Glasgow.
Yeah.
Like, that's
Right.
genuinely what they believe.
Uh-huh.
And when you say to them, oh no, that's set in Edinburgh, they go,
Don't confuse them and tell them
No.
that some of it was shot
No.
in Glasgow. Yeah.
yeah.
Because then you've got Billy Connolly and stuff, and he's got all sorts of different stories that are all very relatable that aren't Specifically just about Glasgow. That's what I think. That's why so many he's like loved all over the world. They're not that much. They're not horrible, grim stories. But no, I don't really think about it that much, but I do want to sort of. That's kind of what I want to learn to figure out a way of talking about a little bit. I don't know how, and I don't know how much there'll be relying on people's sort of preconceptions of it, or explain it to people what it's really like, or toying with the two of them, because there is a thing of like what you're talking about is just like comedians from the north going to London and being like, oh yeah, I'm from wherever, it's shit, and then people are like, well, I've never been there, so I believe him. I believe
Rotherham
him.
Must be horrible, because this person from Rotherham that I'm paying to be here. This jester has come from Rotherham to tell us about how bad Rotherham is. Yeah, and that's his purpose.
Yeah, and there's definitely a responsibility in that. I think that should be taken seriously. But yeah, so you've not lived in Glasgow. Have you lived in Glasgow since then?
So I lived 2009 to 2013.
Mm-hmm.
Then I went back to the northeast, and then I came back in 2020.
Was
So
that
it
nice?
7 years.
Was that nice going back to Durham? For the second time.
I went back principally for work. I think I couldn't really conceive of Glasgow as like a place that I did a job at that period.
Hard to recontextualize it as a.
It was like a university city that I just lived in for university and being young, and I was wanting to grow up and be a person, so I had to move away. I don't know why that was the feeling about it, but it was.
That's interesting. You're like, well, this is me going back to where I've.
Yeah.
The growing up I've done. I have to go back to the font of growing up, of growing up. This wasn't a place where I grew I grew up. Even though you will have done a lot of growing up in your time in uni.
But it was like Glasgow is kind of like when you're on holiday and you go, well, I could just stay here. It's brilliant here. It's like,
Yeah.
no, being on holiday is brilliant. Yeah, interesting so all my friends who I grew up with in Durham they all moved to London. I was one of the only ones who didn't go to London. And all of the ones who've gone to London have gotten to their 30s, found that London is too expensive, or at least you have to live in this terrible rat race to afford anything, decide to have children, and where have they come back to? Durham. Right. So they're all back in Durham. So they're going, on a Friday night, they go back into the pub that they did when they were 16. And I genuinely think a part of it for them is there are two places in the world. There's London that you go when you're in your 20s, and then there's Durham that you live in the rest of the time.
Right.
And it's really odd, without being patronising, trying to explain to them, there are other cities. You could move to Leeds or Manchester. There's places that have a more life to them than Durham City. We've got Azizis now. I get where they're coming from.
But there is a thing I think of what we're talking about in terms of like geography, but also just experiences of what other people have done. Like your parents taking you to the Fringe. That everything else is uncharted.
Yeah.
And well, I haven't got any. No, I've never met any. Maybe it's I'm not one for being like, we're still cavemen up here, because I think that's such a daft way of talking, and I'm really suspect of anybody who does actually have that. But to be a complete hypocrite, maybe it is like a survival thing of being like, well, I've never met anybody who's gone to Manchester and lived to tell tell me the tale, so I'm not fucking going to Manchester. Whereas I know a couple of people who have gone to London and they've come back and told me that it's pretty cool. So that's an option. I don't know if it. I don't know if it.
I do think that so much of these decisions that are like epochal in our life are made based on just vibes. Yeah. Just like you wake up in the morning and you go, I don't think I'm a Leeds person. I don't think Sheffield's for me. Yeah. I've seen the Full Monty. Seems like a lot of poverty and dancing.
It's either steal or stripping. I haven't got the body for anyway. What is it like? Because you are a big football person. Yeah. Which is Sunderland AFC. Sunderland AFC, which I had a look at their Instagram page today. They're the Stadium of Light, is it?
Yes.
The Stadium of Light. How long have you supported them for? As long as you can.
Yes.
Remember?
So I first went in 1993, and I've had a season ticket since 97.
Because another question I want to ask, which is maybe just the same question as this, is in Durham, beyond your childhood home, what was your second home in when you were growing up? Was that?
Yeah, it would be Sunderland. My dad's family are from Sunderland, and my mum's family lived from Hartlepool, but a few of them lived in Sunderland as well. So,
would the stadium have been the place that you knew most well?
I guess.
A second home that's not a literal dwelling.
Do you ever think about this? Do you ever think about trying to map out a city in the places that you actually frequent in that city? How, because people talk about moving to London and they say, well, we've got everything here. We've got the National Gallery and we've got the Barbican and stuff. And I always think, how often are you in the National Gallery?
Yeah.
You have access to all of these things, provided you have enough money. But actually, access doesn't really mean that much. It's about our lives are much smaller than the potential of our lives.
Sure.
So, I've spent countless hours watching Sunderland lose at the Stadium of Light, but actually my experience of Sunderland as a place, I would say, I've been to Sunderland thousands of times, but actually my experience of Sunderland probably is my dad's a publican, so I go in the pub, I spend a bit of time in the city centre, I've got mates who run restaurants and that kind of thing, I've been there, but there's loads of bits of and I used to work in culture in Sunderland doing community engagement, so there's loads of little kind of corners of it that I have been to for one reason or another. We're running a samba class or whatever. the all of that. But actually, there's like loads of bits of, I don't know, Pallion, or Seaburn, which is like little part of some former towns that have been subsumed in the city that I've just like never really been to. I've never. There's so many streets that I've never really walked down. So can I say that I actually have been to this place? Because actually, the map of my engagement with it is so much different to the.
In terms of charted and uncharted, it's like when you play like a video game and the map.
Yeah.
Some of it's is faded because you've not actually been there.
Oh, like,
but if we could carjack anybody with zero responsibility, I would have explored every nook and cranny of this city. Sure,
but yeah, in your mind's eye of Glasgow are the bits like a sort of 15th century monks map where there's just a dragon drawn. There's one floor of the St Enoch Centre that says like beware, beware the monster of the deep. Some
of it is that. I mean, I've lived in the West End. I've lived in this deep South Side in Cathcart, and now I live in just the tip of the South Side in Govan, but I've never lived in the East End, so I don't know the East End very well. Not a lot of Glasgow is uncharted for me, but then sometimes I'll be on taking a new bus, taking a different bus, and I'm like, does this driver know that I'm... Have we left Glasgow? Because that's not cool.
Yeah.
That's not cool if we've left Glasgow. Because you can't do that to me. Yeah. I'm scared.
You get on a bus and it goes on the motorway for a little bit.
And
you're like, oh my God, where am I going? Where am I off to? Why are we on this mode of transportation that was built for intercity travel? This is intercity.
Yeah. So what is it like? Because I'm not a big football fan. Has it been a comfort to you what's it like having a relationship with a team?
Oh, it's interesting. Yeah, I guess. Do you know?
You can't talk about this for 4 hours.
No,
I'm gonna have to cut you off at a certain point. And has that been a comfort to you as you've moved around?
Yeah. Yes. I guess it's like a travelling community that's sort of constantly there. This is coming to real start focus recently because Newcastle have been sold to Saudi Arabia, and
I have heard of that.
Yeah, and I have friends who are socialists who are still going to Newcastle matches, and you're like, you understand that you're now the mouthpiece for a fascist regime, like That's who you are, and it's really unfortunate. That's who you are, but that is who you are. And it happened with us about 10 years ago. We had Paolo Di Canio, who has Il Duce tattooed on it, so not great.
What does that mean?
Oh, it's Benito Mussolini.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So so he's an Italian, and he was a fascist, and it became a big news story and something to beat the northeast of England with, and specifically Sunderland in the national press. But we stopped going during the period that Paolo Di Canio was there. Now, luckily, he was only there for about 15 games because he's mad, And also, the thing about fascists is they can't really put the arm around the shoulder of a lad and go, "It's all right, mate. Don't worry, I believe in you." He hasn't had a managerial job since, I don't think, and he was accused of.
Oh, he was a manager. I didn't know if he was a manager or a player. Right. Okay.
So he was the manager and. He was accused of managing by hand grenade, and he's sort of a very difficult guy. But the fact that we appointed him in the first place was like, we were set up by teachers and miners. We were supported by unions in our salad years, and it felt like it was turning back on that. So far away from my own personal dislikes of fascism, it felt like a betrayal of the culture of the institution.
Right, okay.
So yes.
Was that the general vibe?
Very divisive period. And a lot of people who didn't really understand what fascism was came out in favour of Paolo Di Canio. I don't know how they feel about him now. There was a long period where this happened at football matches, not just Sunderland, but it did happen with us, where players would take the knee in support of Black Lives Matter beforehand. and however much it was expressed in the press by said players that it was an anti-racist protest, they would get booed. They would get booed by the fans, because there was this hokey right-wing talking point that was all about how it was in favour of Marxism. Now, firstly, if you're in Sunderland, why are you in support of capitalism? Like, what has it ever done for you? Marxism should be your natural de facto go-to. You're there on the weekend, thank Marxism, right? But that kind of thing, that exists within that club. Equally, we went to Wembley and everyone sang the national anthem, apart from like me and my brother and a couple of other people. Why are you proud of the royal family? Like, what is that? You're from Sunderland. They've never done anything for you. They've actively disliked you. Like, what is the purpose of your support for them? Equally, like, the British Army or the police are sent in as strike breakers. People are proud of Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill said during the 1926 national lockout, send the rats back down their holes. They're talking about your grandparents, your great-grandparents. Like, why are you supporting Tory prime ministers, Tory institutions that are built purely for to keep you in a kind of system of perpetual slavery? But that is existent within our society and within that football club. So I find it really, really difficult to square that up, because I have this idealised view of what Sunderland is, which is like, it's a community club where people care about each other, and we want justice, and we want people to be paid fairly, and we want the community to succeed, and it's about the grassroots of it. And yet all of these other problems exist. And you find that in like Scotland, Glasgow was always very left wing in my experience, and like the idea of Tories winning in Glasgow was ludicrous, and yet race rioting is sort of on the rise. There's been racial abuse incidents. I certainly see it. I live near Victoria Road in Govan Hill, and like there is racist agitation around there that happens consistently. So I don't know, it's really hard to base your identity on these things when you are presented consistently with things that are diametrically opposed to what you believe in.
Yeah.
Like, I can say I'm a fan of Sunderland, but I also know that there are people who are also fans of Sunderland that I hate, I fundamentally disagree with, and who are enacting policies and ideas that are to the detriment of our community, our future, and our society.
Right.
So it's the problem with putting yourself in a big tent. Like, it lets loads of other people in the tent. That's the thing about tents. So it's quite easy to get in. Yeah.
So, and does all of that fire off as synapses in your brain when you think about your team and how much you love them, and when you check a score and stuff like
I think I have a much more personalised and small-scale communal relationship to it, which is based on my family all going as a bonding exercise to see Sunderland, and that having happened for generation upon generation. So I can kind of excuse myself by saying, well, I go to Sunderland and there are fascists that go to Sunderland as well, but I don't see any of them. You know, the support that I have for Sunderland is actually the pure kind of support. I'm supporting them in the right way. There were some people who support them in the wrong way, but I'm doing it correctly.
Right, okay.
Which I know is a level of mental gymnastics, but if I guess if you consistently said, I can only do things that are explicitly moral and other people can't interpret them in an immoral way, you probably never do anything.
You wouldn't do anything, of course,
so,
of course. But it must be okay. So the answer has been it's complicated to have a relationship with a football team, because I don't support Aberdeen, but I've followed them on social media and I do check them out. I don't have any subscription, so I can watch matches, but I would like to watch some matches. But then I think I'm also kind of like, oh, it's actually quite expensive to like go to games or like go to away games, or you need to know somebody who like about for tickets and all that. So I think once you learn about the logistics and then the sort of actual lived experience of it, then that obviously brings. I just, because I'm not like a sports person or a football person, I'm just like, oh, it's just like a score.
Yeah.
I know that it's more than that, but I have no idea about
let me ask you
that,
this, right?
because I know what it's like to have a relationship with a city, and then you're like, oh well, it's actually it's more complicated than it just being good or shit.
Yeah. Well, right. Let me ask you this question: do you? Because I do this with Sunderland. I naturally gatekeep my experience of Sunderland and what being a fan is, based on my previous, and this is like a near Victorian ideal, on my previous struggles with that football team. So I've been to see us away at Southend where Jimmy Dunn missed the ball in the last minute and we conceded, and it took hours and hours and hours to get back. Like I went to see us against West Ham away, and it was pissing it down. There was just one drip from the stadium roof that went on the top of my head for the entirety of the 90 minutes. I say 90 minutes, it was 80 minutes because we scored 2 in the first 10. I missed both of them, and then we got in and West Ham came back, Brian Dean, and scored twice, and then they scored again in the last 5 minutes. So we lost 3-2. I didn't see either of our goals, and I saw the other 3, and they got rained on the entire time. I have had years and years and years of those kind of experiences, and I think that makes my fandom of Sunderland better than someone who hasn't had that.
Sure.
Now, there's obviously, that becomes problematic because, like, what if someone was born in Nairobi and they support Sunderland and they've never been to the game? Are they a worse fan than me because they're like, oh, that's quite problematic because that's about access.
Yeah.
And
whereas you would, in a very pure way, you would be like, they're at the game, you're not. They're a better fan than you.
Exactly.
This Nairobi immigrant is a better fan than you because he's in the stand.
He's in the stand. But and that's also complicated by the fact that when you watch football on telly, you get a totally different experience to the football that you watch live. Because when you watch football live, you can see how tactically the teams interact with each other,
right?
And how transition and development and all of those things work. So when anyone's talking about how a team should be playing, I always want to know whether they've watched it on TV or whether they've watched it live, because if they've watched it on TV, they probably don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
So that's problematic. Now, let me extrapolate that wider to be about living in places. So like, I'm middle class, right? And I've always pretty much, ever since I was in it's like 5 or 6 or whatever, been like fairly comfortable middle class. We used to be lower middle class, and now we're like proper middle class, right? And so I've never lived as a working class person in the city of Newcastle or Glasgow.
Right.
So have I actually experienced Glasgow or Newcastle?
Yeah, of course.
Do you think?
Yeah,
or
because there's loads of different people that everybody's experience is their own, and you have to have rich people. You don't have to.
Yeah.
But
all right. Well, let me ask you this: if I was a billionaire living in Glasgow and getting chauffeur driven everywhere, and I only went to the posh restaurants and I lived in a penthouse, would I have experienced Glasgow in the way that you've experienced Glasgow?
No, because I'm not a billionaire.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
So where upon that sliding scale do we say you've got a real lived experience of the place?
Yeah.
You know, I feel like I have to come to a lot of places with a sense of humility because I just don't have the lived experience that lots and lots of other people have.
Yeah.
So like, I love Glasgow, but I live in a real sanitized version. Like, I live in a beautiful little enclave in the south side. Like, I go to nice pubs. I don't work in dangerous environments. I don't work like 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't do any of that. So have I really lived here?
Well, yeah, I think so. I think you have, and I don't think the authentic experience of a place is the hardest experience. I think that's a very. I mean, what I would say to that is that somebody would be like, well, I was born and raised in Denniston, and they're going to describe their life the exact same way that you've described supporting Sunderland, that they've been through the shit, and they've been, when they didn't have amenities, and I lived here before there was Azizis, and blah blah, and they will think that their citizenship or whatever is superior to yours, when that's not right. That's not true. I don't think.
Because we both contribute to the social makeup of the place. So therefore, I am, because I'm here as well as them, whether I'm a malign force or not, I am still as much a contributing factor as they are.
I think so. It's all in the big pot of what makes us vibrant, exciting city with different people. Exciting. As my mum would say, if we're all the same, it'd be a very boring place. But I generally do think that. I think that there is a part of, like, obviously we're not talking about gentrification, and I'm not an authority to talk about that. And that is there's definite issues in a place being gentrified. But I don't think that someone could say that your experience is inauthentic. I mean, Jesus Christ, you've played gigs you've done a gig in the Loudon Tavern.
I have done that, yeah.
Now that's an authentic experience. That's an authentic Glasgow experience. True, you've met someone and you've fallen in love in Glasgow, and now you're making a home here. In terms of life, doesn't get more authentic than that. And and I don't think that you're falling in love and making a home together is any less authentic than somebody who has met someone and fallen in love and made a home together, whether it's a tenement, a tenement flat or a mansion or a semi-detached house or something like that. So I don't really think it's inauthentic.
It's interesting because there's a great book called Buildings and Dwelling by Richard Sennett.
Okay.
And I've read most of it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's about the difference, what makes cities. And it's really interesting at the moment. We're starting talking about 15-minute cities and how the social makeup and density has to become larger because we utilise too much carbon getting out to places. And in that book, Richard Sennett talks about the two things that make up a city. There is the cité, as CITE with an accent aigu, and the ville. And I can't remember which way round it is, but I'm going to say it's this way round. The ville is the infrastructure with which the city lives. It is the trains, the trams, the buses, the way that people can interact with each other, how the centre is set up, how the shops are programmed, how the pubs work, licensing laws, transportation laws, how whether you have a pedestrianisation zones, blah 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 blah.
Yep.
That is the ville, right? That is how the city looks. The cité is the lifeblood of the city, which is created by the interactions. So it's like the much more ephemeral idea of, when people say people make Glasgow, what they're talking about is like this general overriding idea of what Glasgow is, which is like a place in which human beings can connect and talk to each other with truth, honesty, and a collective will to support and prosper together. Mm-hmm. Right. So that is the two differences between those two.
Interesting. That's really, really interesting. I should at least get that book from the library.
Yeah, at least. I've got it.
So city, so the ville is the infrastructure of how you and perhaps another, what you're saying, like a working class supporter would travel to Sunderland. Somebody would maybe take a couple of buses or something, whereas you would maybe be like, well, we've got the car, we'll go there. But then the ville is that you could be stood next to somebody who isn't culturally or politically aligned with you, and they might just turn to you, and because you're under the same umbrella and under the same tent, they'll make a comment about zonal marking, and you'll go, "Don't get me started, mate." And that's what makes the lifeblood of something. And as long as you don't talk about anything beyond that, you'll be lovely to meet. Lovely to meet you. Good talking to you.
You've had that at parties before, where you're talking to someone and you feel like you're aligned, and then they say, "Do you know?" I remember was it one of my wife's family's parties.
Sorry, I'm not bored about your wife's family's parties. I'm just seeing how long we've recorded for.
It was his
sweet
40th birthday, and met one of his friends who was he's a QPR fan. He's also a QPR fan. And so we talked about Sunderland had played QPR that week. We beat them 3-0. Awesome. So we talked about Sunderland and QPR for a long time, and then he revealed he said, "Oh yeah, no, I like comedy. You know, I really love that Ricky Gervais. Like, he's one of the only people who actually believes in freedom of speech, right? And it's one of those bizarre right-wing statements which I was like, oh, I desperately don't want to speak to this person anymore. And it totally changed my opinion of them. And they were a policeman as well. There you go. But yeah, it's interesting that we had like a communal bond based on one thing and then not based on the other.
Yeah, that's tough.
That's
tough.
Do you ever think about the kind of organic versus imposed way that people relate to each other? Like whether cities are better if they are just left to their own devices to exist, prosper, fulfill the needs. Maybe not just in a capitalist way, just like maybe this place needs a coffee shop. A place opens where it's a coffee shop, and suddenly that coffee shop becomes incredibly popular because because unbeknownst to everyone, they needed a coffee shop, right? Or there was enough communal people who wanted to do Morris dancing that they eventually started talking about Morris dancing, and now there's a Morris dancing society, right? That's like the organic way of doing it. Or you can create and restructure a city entirely from like, whoever's in charge believes that the city centre needs to be like this, so we'll install that, and this is where the housing will be,
like East Kilbride or something like that.
Yeah,
like one of those like towns where they were made, they were like created.
But like Barcelona is made like that.
Is it?
So there's loads of places that are and loads of post-war rebuilding programs are actually quite responsible, and there's loads of like social housing. Social housing's a good thing that is built by the government for the needs of the people. If you left it up to society, council houses wouldn't exist. Mm-hmm. So, or you left it to the market or whatever force there is, it's like that social housing has to be imposed on the community. Libraries are for the good of the people. Before milk becomes pasteurized mandatorily in 1923, but before that you could buy cheap unpasteurized milk or pasteurized milk. So poor people got ill on the unpasteurized milk that was full of diseases that the cow had, and rich people could afford to have pasteurized milk. So like that is the organic way of doing it. If you let people decide on like a purely economic basis. Now, milk did become more expensive, but it was for the good of the people who were drinking it.
Right.
That they didn't get ill.
Yes. Okay.
So, like, you constantly have that battle in between what is a good imposition on society and what should just be left to grow.
I think about that sort of stuff, but not in as structured, as much of a structured way. I definitely do, but I am not convinced that I don't always trust my thoughts because I assume that there's like a prejudice that there's a prejudice in there somewhere, and try and just I definitely do think of think of things like that. Like, well, would I like to? What would happen if I, tried to raise a family in an area of deprivation or something like that?
Okay.
I have a story about an experience as I went to this year. Was it this year? Yeah, this year I went to see Blythe Spartans FC.
Yes. Yeah, do you know about their controversial promotional sponsorship with North Korea?
No.
Yeah. So they're sponsored.
Now that's my experience. That's my experience and my connection with Blythe Spartans ruined.
I believe they're sponsored by Pyongyang.
Right.
Yeah. Some kind of like Visit North Korea drive that is being done in Pyongyang's North Korea, isn't it? Yeah.
Sure.
Seoul is South Korea.
Yes.
Pyongyang
Seoul
is
is South Korea.
Yeah.
I didn't see that.
Yeah.
I didn't come up.
How was Blythe Spartan?
The experience itself was great. So it was as part of a stag do, and it was my friend Darryl was the stag, and it had been organised that we were going to go see Blythe Spartans. And we went and we had hospitality for the day,
nice.
Which was great. There was pizza and chips and an open bar, which I didn't. I wasn't able to take advantage of. But lots of. I think it was just maybe like Beck's, just like stuff that. I remember what Beck's is like, just going down like water, lovely.
Yeah.
And Budweiser, and it was fantastic. And I think we had to get taxis from Newcastle out to the grounds. Forgive me for forgetting what they were.
What is Blythe Spartans?
And then we were on the way, and because we were hospitality and we were like sponsoring the match, we were able to pick man of the match.
Of course.
And then I was in the taxi and I was kind of like, could you bet on man of the match? And then someone was like, John, are you talking about match fixing? And I was like, I think I am. I guess I am. And I was like, I can see how it starts. I can see how it starts.
Insider trading, I guess, isn't it? It's that's when you know the outcome of something, and then you. Yeah. So we went. They didn't do well. They didn't do well. And then there was halftime, more beers and food and stuff like that. And then we also put Darryl the stag in a full kit. And we were. This is interesting to what you're talking about. We were in the grounds, which is basically like the normal access before we went up to hospitality. That was just basically a massive function room. And we were in a corner, and we could feel that we weren't obviously home fan. We're literally there because it's a novelty, even though the stag and a lot of the other people on the stag just love football. Yeah, and that's why we're all here. Yeah.
And when I got up on one of the tables and said this to everybody, they started throwing pies at me. But no, there was a sense of that. There was a sense of that, but I'm sure they're like, oh well, who? I don't know how. I don't know how you'd feel. I think you'd be like, it's a stag do that have chosen to come, and they've given our little club some money. But the game, they lost. I remember during the second half, the chairman one of the main things I remember was after the whistle blew at halftime, and it's very small grounds. And when the whistle blew at halftime, there was a guy who was below us who was clearly like a loyal, die-hard fan, been going there for years. The whistle blew, and he was clearly talking to the manager. So the whistle blew, and he went, "Are you happy, Terry? You were shite."
Good.
And I was like, and then I would look to the match program, and I was like, yeah, that's the manager he's talking to. But clearly within conversing distance that they were in. And then latterly in the second half of the match, the chairman was like, "Have you decided who you want for man of the match yet?" And then Darryl was like, "That guy's been really good. He's been really good all game, and he had. And
Right.
and then they're like, okay, great. Well,
So I thought you were part of a vote, a wider vote, but it was just you guys who decided man the match.
yeah,
Wow.
it was a stag do that
Right.
decided who man of the match.
Oh, blind leading the blind.
And then, the blind
amazing.
leading the blind.
The blind.
and he got picked for man of the match, and then immediately after that, somebody else scored the Spartans' only goal.
Right.
Who was, if you're scoring goals, you're one of the men of the match.
Yeah.
But then after, when we were back in hospitality and the young lad who was man of the match came up, it was a bit odd. There was a bit of an odd vibe because he was kind of like, "Why am I? Why am I man of the Why am I man of the match?"
Yeah.
But it was cool that the chairman and there's like older guys in suits and stuff like that were like opening bottles of beer for us and opening Asda bottles of like soda water and they were really like mucking in and stuff like that.
Great.
And I was like, this is cool. I've got a lot of time for this. And then afterwards, weirdly, Aberdeen and Blythe at the time, I guess, had the same sponsors.
Right.
So Blythe just had like an extra large Aberdeen top lying around the offices, fully signed, and then they presented it to
Oh, that's nice.
Daryl the stag.
Nice.
Yeah. Which was a really nice
Yeah.
bonus, and there was some photo opportunities and stuff. Daryl felt like a bit of a gimp, just sort of stood in the full Blythe kit as well. But it was really funny. It was really nice. So I don't know what the spot. I guess Visit North Korea isn't the main sponsor.
No, I think they are.
It's just an oil company, which is
pitch
only
side.
slightly less problematic.
No, I think they're like a pitch side sponsor.
Okay.
But yes, there was local uproar when that happened because obviously they're a totalitarian regime. I don't think you should really. I don't know. We people went to Spain, didn't they, until in the 60s and 70s, and they were under a military junta. So.
And I think it's a bit of that thing of like what we were talking about of like, you don't go to a place until you're encouraged to. But you're like, visit North Korea. I'll wait till one of my pals goes and comes back and tells me what one of the pubs are like.
It's interesting going to lower league football, though, isn't it? Because
I loved it.
There's almost no financial incentive. Like, it's just survival.
Unless you're trying to fix man of the match.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless you're like me and you're trying to fix man of the match.
The footballers are doing it because they really want to be they really want to play football like to a competitive level and test themselves, but there's no money in that because they're probably plumbers and lackeys and they do other things during the week.
Mm-hmm.
The people who are custodians of it are just keeping it alive.
Yeah.
They're just keeping it alive week and week and week, just so that bloke in the stand can shout you were shite, like Terry.
He needs that,
like it's for him
because he needs to do that.
So there's like I totally understand when sort of Tory prime ministers come out and they want to kill grassroots football because for them it doesn't really have any value. There's no monetary gain from these things existing. They're just purely like societal artifacts that are culturally, personally, communally positive, but not there's no remuneration for it.
Yeah. Two questions I wanted to ask you before we wrap up was. What is, and this is like a feature type thing that I'm trying to think of, is what is a home truth to you, and what that would be like a criticism of Durham or perhaps the northeast that you think maybe hasn't been leveled out before, or there's something where maybe the thing where you're like, I think what not what the problem is or anything like that, but or that could be actually against stereotype. It's this, which you may have already covered, that the sense of humour is actually a lot more surreal and alternative than a lot of people give it credit for.
Yeah, I think. What do I think about Durham? I think Durham is a lot more. So the big meeting is at Durham, the Miners' Gala,
Really,
which is the biggest socialist meetup in Europe.
Right. Wow.
and that happens every June. Or when I say June, I don't think it's supposed to be a feather in the cap, right, of the people of Durham and the kind of ex-miners that are there. I don't think it's as universally loved as people pretend. I think like a lot of that is people coming in from the outside. I think there's been a gentrification change in Durham. I don't think the if you go into Durham city now, the mining villages are represented at all anymore. So it's just this really bizarre festival of like working class identity in a place that has almost no working class identity now, and it's much more like
ceremonial,
yeah. Yeah, so I think it's like the Durham. This is the biggest thing that happened in Durham, and Durham Council and all of the people that own anything in Durham the rest of the year are desperately trying to take apart all of the structures that allow those people to kind of exist within the region or area. So yeah, so I think it's like a really strange thing now that is representative of an era, or a people that still exist but have no access to the town now, and an era where they were celebrated and are now like actively marginalised. Yeah.
Wow, that's very interesting. That's exactly the sort of the sort of thing that I was looking for. Do you think that
it's loads more Tory? It's despite the fact that Tories would never win in Durham. I don't know, well, maybe that's not the case anymore, but I think the Northeast, certainly city centres in the Northeast, are becoming loads more right wing than like the whole identity thing suggests. You know, we are supposed to be the bastions of communal love for each other. I don't think that's the case as much anymore.
So it's mad to think that like a miners' convention could become like cheese rolling or Morris dancing or like pole climbing. Like it's becoming like less grounded and more ceremonial. That it might just be like everybody puts on a hat and then eats a pie.
They bring out the guy dolls of the wives, and they hit their wives, and then it's like, let's do parody of working class life. Everyone gets a whippet on a string that they walk through the town.
But that's an interesting thing, and I appreciate that you had the courage to make to level a criticism. I think that's genuinely brave and insightful as well.
I think there's just a rise of individualism that is like a worrying tide within our society, and it bodes really, really badly for what is going to happen next. Right. Because we need communal force within our major cities in order to battle the huge, inextricable like forces that are coming our way. Like climate change does. If individualism wins, which it probably already has, right? But this like Thatcherite Ayn Rand individualism, which seems to govern all of our politics, if that wins, we all die from climate change. That is it. Yeah. So, I just think it's obviously you can see that in loads and loads of other cities where people are like, well, I don't want my private school fees are so expensive, and I'm like, boo hoo hoo, right, in the Telegraph, but they are so myopic with their view of society that they are not willing to either maybe put their kids through state school, or maybe state schools should be as good as private schools or whatever, for homelessness to end. Like that's just not a concept that they could even think about. And when we have within the next 100 years 150 million climate refugees, and climate change like disrupting our food chains and supply chains, and that all of those things happening, if we allow individualism to just like conquer all politics, in the way that we have like capitalism, we've allowed capitalism to just conquer all politics. Now there's no possible alternative. Then we all die. So I worry about that quite a lot.
Yeah. That's about it. I don't have that much. I do have climate anxiety, but I'm never like, whenever somebody goes on like, talks at length about that, I'm always more. I feel a bit more like, okay, than Jesus Christ, What is a home comfort?
Of
good
yours? Question. Have you ever had pinnacle tea?
No. Did you say that already?
No, I don't think so.
What did you say? Pina? Did you say pin something?
What was it? What give me a context.
Remember?
Can you use the word in a sentence?
What is it a food?
Yes. So, do you find this right? So, like, so many of our what we would call traditional British dishes are just like wartime food. where it was
Dish is dish is not really fair,
because that doesn't really happen with any other like consumable. Like the things that you like and look fondly upon in like music or film, they're not entirely constructed from scarcity during wartime.
Yeah,
like it's just food.
Yeah,
we don't we don't go. Oh, I'll tell you what I like when people play a dish with a spoon. No,
yeah,
we're able to conceive of past that.
Yeah, I mean Britain does that the most.
Yeah. 100%.
And it's not just food, because people would also say like, oh well, all we needed to have a good time was 2 like syrup cans, and then do a lot with 2 syrup cans and some string, to be fair. But so what is pinnacle tea?
So pinnacle tea is corned beef and chopped onions in gravy, watery gravy, very very thin gravy.
Very thin gravy. Jesus, when you said watery, and then you said, sorry, I'm gonna have to correct myself. Very thin.
Very thin, and then it's all mixed up, and then brought to the boil to simmer. So the onions and the corned beef and the very thin gravy all cooked together, and then you spread that on bread.
Right.
Yeah. And that is like a wartime. That was something my mum used to make.
Really?
And that's like a wartime food. And I think it's one of those things.
Have you ever tried to make it yourself?
No. And I don't know why I would try to do that when I can make shakshuka or a dal, things that have an actual enjoyable taste. Pinnacle tea, the taste is not nice. It is all-encompassing. It's a vibe that it's like a fog that you kind of exist within. So I can taste it now.
Right. Yeah.
Do you know, in 1996 or something, I had a bacon sandwich on a Virgin train, right? And it was obviously...
I was like, what happened?
Yeah.
I thought this was going to be another thing about... I thought this was going to be like New Labour's coming through or something. It's like, so sorry. Please start that anecdote from the top.
In I think 1996, I had a bacon sandwich on a Virgin train, right? And I'm just thinking about when did Virgin start privatising trains? Trains are privatised in what, 92, 93? It's conceivable that it's 96. It was pre 9/11. I know that. I would never think about. A lot of my
bacon sandwich would have tasted very different after 9/11.
Yeah, I would have been glad that I had bacon on a sandwich of the existential threat of terror. But I had a bacon sandwich on a train, and it was cooked in on a paraffin heater or something, right? And made sort of reheated incredibly badly, and clearly there was some paraffin oil on it. Anyway, I ate it and it made me feel really sick. And then for maybe the next 10 years, whenever I felt sick, I tasted that bacon sandwich, right?
Wow.
It was like it connected directly to whatever the neuron is to sick in my brain, I'd go, I feel sick. Do you know why I know I feel sick? Because I taste virgin train bacon sandwich, and that's how I know. And so I think it's very similar with Pinnacle-T. Like, whenever I eat Pinnacle-T, I think, oh, it's back at my mum's and it's the 90s.
Sure.
So it's a very heavy taste, both emotionally and I think probably physically, because it's like there's lots of very strong elements to it, even though it's quite a weak, watery dish.
Corned beef,
like
onions.
corned beef, onion, and gravy. It's like all cooked up together.
They're three competing ingredients.
Yeah. So I think Pinnacle-T
And bread.
Which is bread's very.
Yeah.
I think the reason that it
They're
was
all
like that is
struggling for space.
You could put it on stale bread and it would seep in and make it edible again.
Yeah.
There's lots of those kind of things in wartime food.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. That's a home comfort.
I think so.
But do you do? Yeah, I mean, I have made my own like mince and tatties on occasion, but I prefer obviously like my when my mum makes it, which she probably doesn't enjoy as much as her mum making it. But yeah, is there anything that you? Is there any? I guess following Sunderland at a distance is enough to make you feel close to close to home.
So I went to see Sunderland home and away for years.
I cannot believe
years.
how much we've talked about football on this podcast.
But I think if you're talking about community, like football is a combining factor, isn't it, of loads and loads of different communities. You know, it's a very simple thing that loads of people can focus on. It's a club that is done for the good of the surrounds generally, and that's why it's really strange when a billionaire buys your football club. This should never happen. Mm-hmm. Football clubs should be run like the chairman should be opening bottles of beers in the. There was a guy I used to know, died a couple of years ago, called Dave Harper, right? And he ran Pop Rex in Sunderland, the music, the gig venue, and he wrote this thing for Independent Record Week that was like, whenever we play at independent venues, you never really meet the guy who runs it because he's like off hoovering something or typing something up or like fucking working. He's actually doing the job of being the people that you meet when you meet the guy who runs the venue. You go, you don't really run a venue.
Yeah,
like this, you employ someone else to run the venue. So
yeah,
that's absolutely right.
That's such a good point. I love that. I don't think we're going to talk. We have talked loads about Glasgow, but in terms of homes and places that you call home and places that you've spent a bit of time, I thought we could end our conversation today by you telling us a little bit about Paula.
Paula. So Paula.
What is Paula? who is Paula?
Who is Paula? Paula is a 2001 Lamborghini yellow. Lamborghini yellow.
Lamborghini yellow.
Yellow. VW Transporter. A van with a sliding door that doesn't quite fit, and she doesn't have any air conditioning, and the lights in the back don't work, and the handles on the windows come off. And
what lights on the back?
So
your brake lights?
No. So I bought her off. I bought her off a raver who got into credit card debt, and clearly this van was built to drive around to raves in the early noughties.
Sure.
And so I never want to put a black light around it. I don't know. So I bought her to travel around Europe performing my show. And so I drove to Reykjavik in Paula.
Because obviously, as we've said, you need a lot of space
to
transport this show.
That's right. So
where's Paula from?
Paula,
after Germany, after she was born in Germany, where did she spend most of her?
So the guy was from Liverpool.
So did you have to? I've always wondered. I have never drive, but I always wonder what the journey's like to go and buy a car.
Yeah. So he drove to a train station. And I got off the train, bought the car off him, and then I drove Paula back home.
And then he got back on the train,
and he got picked up by his then girlfriend, who I imagine
Why
is
are
still
you
his girlfriend. He seemed like the
That's
kind of
such a
guy
loaded
that
thing to say, David.
Yeah.
By his then girlfriend.
There's no way he's continued that relationship. He was a strange. He was nice. He was just strange, you know.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, but Paula was in good nick. I mean, she's done 215,000 miles, so that's a lot. But in a van, it's not actually that much because they're built to just run and run and run.
Mm-hmm.
She's like driving a tugboat, you know. It's like constant the whole time, big diesel engine. And I lived 34 days straight in the back of that van across Europe, which is too long.
It's too long. A rave is only a couple of nights.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you've been to a festival and like the first day when you're in a tent, it's like, it's so fun. It's crazy. And then when you get to the Sunday, you go, I cannot wait to be back in a house. I sort of did that. Like 10 of those in a row.
And are you, and were you sleeping in amongst all the boxes and stuff? And so you're not a short man.
Under the bed and at the end, the base.
You put a bed in it?
3. There is a rock and roll bed. It's called a rock and roll bed.
What's that mean?
It folds into seats and then it folds out and back down into the
okay.
bed. Yeah.
Right, okay.
But that is those are the Lamborghini yellow racing seats. Not my choice, but I wouldn't have turned it down. Brilliant.
Is the interior leopard print?
No, the interior. Some of the interior is dollar bill insignia.
Yeah, I knew it was something.
Yeah.
Dollar bill insignia.
So
I love it. Fantastic. Absolutely love it.
Yeah. So she's good, and I'm going on the national tour with her. But we're getting. I mean, I've spent $6,000 on her, and I've been to Reykjavik and then across to Stockholm and back, and I'm going to Finland. Once that's done, I think I probably could drive her nationally, but I think internationally might start being a stretch. I mean,
don't want to be in continental Europe with your entire show relying on Paula.
So the worst bit was driving through the mountains in Iceland, right? So Reykjavik. So to get to Iceland, you drive across Britain on the ferry to the Hook of Holland, and then you go up to Hutzals, which is northern Denmark, and then you get the ferry from northern Denmark to Seyðisfjörður in Iceland, and then it's like 15 hours drive across Iceland, because Reykjavik is on that side of Iceland and the ferry is on that side of Iceland. So I was doing that. I did it on 2 days on the way there and I did it on 3 days on the way back. Miserable. On the third day of driving back, and bear in mind...
Was it all very bright in Iceland whilst you were there?
Yes. So I did nearly 400 hours of consecutive daylight in a van that doesn't... The blackout blinds are okay, but they're not amazing. So yeah, just an awful exposure.
The van itself is quite bright.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, they were coming off the dollar bills going straight in my eye. We're driving through the mountains on the third day, and so the ferry is 7:00 the next morning, and the roads are unpaved, and there's just like sheer drops from the mountains to the Icelandic valleys. Death. I'm driving through there, and every time I hit, it's covered in potholes.
People would. The thing is that if you were, I mean, you're fine.
Yeah.
But if an Icelandic policeman finds you dead in that van, you're like, oh, let's not bother with a toxicology report.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's like this. Yeah, British drug addict.
Yeah, British idiot.
Yeah, British idiot.
Yeah,
but what a bizarre.
Only 4x4s coming past, so I am on a road that is probably not safe for
Can you
normal
imagine?
cars.
Who is this?
Yeah. Oh, I imagine that's how they all felt. They were going, this fucking lunatic. Yeah, and every time I hit a pothole, the potholes are big enough to burst your tyre. Every time I hit a pothole, which I'm trying to go round like this, whilst also not driving off the side of the mountain, all the electrics in the van would turn off. So I'd have to stop and then restart the engine with no comprehension each time whether it would start again.
Yes, yeah.
And that was for 3 hours, and I maybe lost power 20 times in that. Genuinely one of the worst periods of my life. And I knew that if I did break down, the nearest village was like 5 hours drive away.
But then you've broken down. For other people driving.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you do manage to get help, it's going to be like 6 hours.
Hello. You'll see me. You'll see.
You'll see me, mate.
You cannot miss me.
Yeah.
Oh.
And then the ferry was 7 o'clock the next morning, so there's no guarantee whether I was going to get on the ferry, and that ferry came once a week.
Wow.
So there was a tense. That was the worst part of travelling in Portland.
But you made it, and you got the ferry.
Yeah, correct.
Great.
Fun.
Wow. But that was all in the service of art.
Yes.
That was all in the service of bringing art to
Yeah.
regions and places.
Yeah.
Which is very good. And that was you doing your show. Everything That's Me is Falling Apart.
Yeah.
Which is, so when do you start the tour of that?
So I'm in Sunderland. I've sold 20 tickets for Sunderland. It's my hometown homecoming. No one cares.
20 people do.
20 people do. That's true. 20 tickets for Sunderland on the 10th of November. None of which have gone to my family. They so far not interested in seeing this multiple international award-winning show. Anyway, then I start the tour, the UK tour, next February, and I'm doing Leeds, Nottingham, Manchester, London, Glasgow, and Birmingham.
Great.
Yeah.
Where are you doing in Manchester?
Gonna have to look
Is it
at
home?
the thing.
It's like one of the places that Excess Malarkey does.
Can't remember, but I don't want to say.
Never
But
mind.
yeah, I can't remember.
Never mind. Well,
But
that'll be
I'll
that's brilliant, and I highly and the Glasgow one's during the comedy festival.
Yeah, that'll be the last one.
That's going to be the final one, and
then I'm doing the first preview of the next show straight after it.
straight after it, and that's is it you get both access to both shows.
Yeah.
2 shows for the price of one.
Yeah.
That's a simple.
But it'll be the first version of that, and I take about 3 years to build these. So expect 28 minutes of me trying to make it work. But it's a good story, and I'm interested in how it's going to work. And there's going to be lots of old tech and new tech and projection mapping and animation and loads of other bits and pieces.
Thank you so much for being a guest. I really, really appreciate it. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.